لنحس في أعماقنا الإيمان
Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. All praise is due to Allah, and may Allah's peace and blessings be on the last messenger of Allah. I would like to share with you, as a beginning, a series on education, on Islamic education and its significance. As in the Muslim world today, there are a number of Muslim schools appearing. In our time, people have come to realize their importance, and so we find, especially in many of the Western countries, US, Canada, UK, South Africa, Australia, etc., an explosion of Muslim schools. And even in Muslim countries, we now find Muslim communities or organizations concerned about Islamic education. In that context, I thought it was good to reflect on the goals of Islamic education and what really constitutes Islamic education. Is an Islamic school merely a building owned by Muslims, run by a Muslim principal, having Muslim teachers and Muslim students? Is that what an Islamic school is? Or are there other issues which go beyond that physical circumstance of Muslim people in a Muslim-owned or controlled setting? My contention is that we do have to look at other issues which are of greater relevance, because the idea of education itself needs to be understood from the experience of the West today. If we look at the definition which is commonly used for education in Islam, or education in general, what we find is that education is defined as a society's formal mechanism for the transmission of its culture. It is equivalent to socialization, the process by which persons are acculturated into a human community. So what we're talking about here is not merely the conveyance of information, we could say secular or scientific information. You learn how to speak English, you learn mathematics, you learn the sciences. It is defined as society's way of conveying its culture to the next generation. That's the root. Therefore, it means that the material which is being used can change and can alter the whole face of that Islamic institution. If the material is not itself geared towards conveying the values of Islamic society, then it will not be surprising if the outcome of these quote-unquote Muslim schools is not much different from Muslims attending government schools or non-Muslim schools. So what I'm suggesting is that we have to keep in mind the role of not only the individuals who are involved in this educational process, the staff, teaching, superstructure, and the building, but we have to look at the content itself. In reality, the Muslim approach to knowledge was always a holistic approach, in that there was no separation between what may be called secular knowledge and religious knowledge. That distinction wasn't made, because the basic concept in Islam is that knowledge fundamentally comes from God. So whatever knowledge is acquired in some way should be used in a way which is pleasing to God, so that no separation was made. Sciences were taught along with the religious sciences, the religious fields of knowledge. The two were taught together to create a whole individual the importance of their character and moral upbringing and goals in life, goals for the life to come, were balanced with the importance also of this life and knowledge necessary to make this life comfortable, to be able to benefit from the various bounties which Allah has put in this world. So that approach was, as I said, a holistic approach. Both aspects of knowledge were taught together. It is in later times that this has been separated. So we now find in the Muslim world an abundance of what we may call madrasas, schools where people go and just learn religious information. And the regular schools where people go and learn secular or worldly knowledge. So now, when we set up a Muslim school, if we haven't grasped this problem of bifurcation of knowledge, where knowledge is now split into two areas, and we only set up our school teaching the same texts which are used, imported from UK, US, or whatever, or even produced in the country, but from that secular perspective. These are the books that we use. And then we only have Islamic studies as a particular period in a day, or so many periods per week. Then we have continued to promote this almost schizophrenic approach to learning, where there is Islamic studies period, where we learn Islam, and the rest of the studies where we learn the worldly knowledge, which is going to earn us a means of living, etc., etc. We don't want that to develop in the minds of the children. If that is happening, then we have not achieved the basic goals of Islamic education or an Islamic educational institution. It is important that each and every subject be presented from an Islamic perspective, where there is one, or within an Islamic context where it can be put. From an Islamic perspective, for example, if we're dealing with sciences, etc., and we're talking about different elements in biology or physics or whatever, the teacher would introduce in his or her class elements which would remind the students that this is all from Allah. This is all a part of Allah's creation. And they would talk about the subject from that type of a perspective. So while talking about how light can be split into different colors through a prism or whatever, that we're talking about Allah created light in such a way. Because if He willed, He could have created it in a way where it doesn't split in this way. So all of these laws, etc., these are all the laws which Allah has put into nature. So when we talk about it, we don't talk about it as something which human beings discovered, and we don't speak about the origin from where it came. So by talking about sciences in this way, we keep the student in touch with his or her religious foundation. There is a link there between the two. So the student doesn't feel that sharp transition between science class and Islamic studies class. In both classes, Allah is mentioned, the greatness of Allah is spoken of, so that common factor exists. Some subjects one might say, well, what about English, or mathematics? English, for example, how do you teach English from an Islamic perspective? Well, the language is the language. We can't deny that the language is from a non-Muslim perspective, but where did language come from? Depending on the level of the knowledge of the students, if you're going to talk about English language, you can bring the idea that language is a gift from God. So there's a place where that can be introduced. But at least
when we're teaching children on a primary level, kindergarten, etc., at least the materials that we're using to teach English, for example, those materials should be presented within an Islamic context, meaning that books for kindergarten are mostly pictures. So what pictures, what images do you show the children? If you show them images that they can relate to, images of Muslim families in a world where there are non-Muslims also, but promoting Muslim values, the language can be taught while at the same time values can be taught.